So I went to a small Mennonite high school, and one of the unique program offerings at that school was an annual interterm. And when I was a student, it took place in the middle of the spring semester, and there were all sorts of offerings for students to choose from for this week of programming. Things like canoe camping, horseback riding, auto mechanics, cooking, bicycling, film and music classes, a whole variety of things to choose from. And my sophomore year, my circle of close friends, we all made plans to make the same election on our forms in efforts to all go on the same trip together. And we were able to swing it. So 10 of my closest friends and a teacher sponsor spent the week at Bradford Woods, which is an outdoor education extension of Indiana University. We backpacked, camped, did the high and low ropes courses, each experience accompanied by learning objectives and relationship building exercises. One of the most memorable experiences for me was spelunking. So spelunking is this fancy word for exploring caves and caverns. And one day we were told to wear long sleeves and long pants in preparation for climbing around inside this system of caverns that was on their property. And when we arrived at the entrance of this cave system, we were told by our guide what we were about to experience. And now, if any of you are ones that get very claustrophobic, this is a good time to refresh your coffee. But he pointed to a hole that was just about as wide as our shoulders. And he began by saying, "We're going to have to enter the cave one at a time, so let me give you instructions now so we can meet up safely on the other side. So when you crawl into this hole, you're going to be headed down at an angle that's about 12 feet long. And once you exit that tube, the space will open up from side to side to about 30 feet wide, but you're only going to have about 21 inches of vertical space to move in. So with your helmets and headlamps on, you're not really going to be able to lift your head up to see where you're going, but just keep crawling forward. And you're going to crawl on your belly like that for about 20 feet until the space opens up, at which point you'll be able to stand again." One of my buddies who got very claustrophobic was struggling to muster up the energy to make this 30-foot crawl on his belly with solid rock above him. Can you blame him? But one by one, we descended into that hole, unsure exactly what we were going to experience, despite the description that had been provided. And 30 feet may not seem that far, but it feels like a long way when you're sliding on your belly. And so I remember shimmying down that 12-foot passage, and then it opened up that I had enough space to sort of get my arms out side to side and better crawl with my head sideways. And after that long crawl, suddenly I could feel the space above my head open up. And I got my entire body out from underneath that tight squeeze and stood up alongside my friends in a room with a ceiling over 20 feet tall. It was a massive place, indeed cavernous, probably feeling extra large after the experience that we had just felt in this tight squeeze. My friends and I had crawled through a very tight place and found ourselves entering a spacious place. We're spending our time this morning in the Psalms. And now, what is the book of Psalms? I'd like to orient us to what we're reading for a moment. For my entire life, up until very recently, I understood the Psalms to effectively be the hymn book of the Hebrew people. Each psalm being an individual unit that can serve as a hymn of praise, a lament, a thanksgiving. And employing this understanding means that I get to shop the psalms. Just like our Voices Together hymn book, we can flip through, find a psalm that we like, pluck it out, and use it. And that is somewhat true. The book of Psalms is this collection of poems and songs written by a variety of authors across a long period of time, and then collected and pieced together. But the Psalter is not just thrown together willy-nilly. There is structure and purpose to how these psalms are curated. And whenever I read my Bible, some of the first questions I ask myself are, who wrote this, when, and to whom? And I found great meaning in understanding the authorship and the construction of our biblical texts, and I hope it can provide you some meaning also. So if you look carefully at modern translations of the Bible, you'll find headings that orient you to the overall structure of the Psalms. And you'll see that the Psalter itself is divided into 5 books. Chapters 1 and 2 serve as these introductory psalms to the Psalter, and then it launches into a 5-book structure. Book 1 is chapters 3 to 41. Book 2 is chapters 42 to 72. Book 3 is chapters 73 to 89. Book 4, chapters 90 to 106. Book 5, chapters 107 to 145. Don't worry, there's not a quiz, just sort of. But the Psalter then concludes with these 5 conclusion psalms at the end that round out the 150 psalms of the Psalter. Theologian Tim Mackey gives a great summary of this structure if you look it up on the Bible Project YouTube channel, but I'll do my best to summarize some of this here as well. So chapter 1 of the book of Psalms refers to obedience to and study of the law, or Torah. Blessed is the one who meditates on the Torah. This is the first verse of the book of Psalms. The Psalter is this 5-book structure. The 5 books serve as a foil to the 5 books of the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the writings of Moses. And so this introductory psalm is setting up this prayer book to the reader as a new Torah, a new teaching on how to pray and be diligent to the teachings that they received in the first Torah, the writings of Moses. Psalm 2, then, is a poetic reflection on God's promise to David to raise up a messianic king who will usher in God's kingdom on earth, and those that follow him will be blessed. Chapter 1 starts with the word blessed. Chapter 2 ends with the word blessed. There are these bookends that set that as a little introductory unit here at the outset of the Psalter. These 2 chapters show us what the whole collection is about. This collection of psalms serves to teach us how to pray as we strive to be faithful to the Torah while waiting for the messianic kingdom. The 5 books that follow each have their own theme that grounds them. Book 1 focuses on the call to covenant faithfulness. The theme for Book 2 is grounded in this hope for a return to the temple and presents a vision of what the messianic kingdom will look like. Book 3 also focuses on this hope for a return to the temple, but is very influenced by exile. The writers reflect on and remember how God promised never to abandon the line of David. But the psalmist looks at the rebellion of the people and the resulting exile, these people who have been taken out of their homeland. This book considers the downfall of the line of David. And there is this plea for God to remember God's promises to the house of David. Book 4 is constructed as a response to the crisis of exile that the people are experiencing. And it's within this book that we find Psalm 100. Book 4 opens with Psalm 90, a prayer of Moses, and calls the readers back to what happened in the wilderness of the Exodus. And the psalm calls upon God to show mercy to the people. And the rest of Book 4 is a collection of poems and songs that name God as the true King of the world. And this is where we find Psalm 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before God with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is God who made us, and we are God's. We are God's people, the sheep of God's pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Book 5 then opens with an affirmation that God will indeed bring a Messiah to lead the people. And Psalm 118 is the concluding psalm of a set referred to as the Hallel. The Psalms 113 to 118 are designated as the Hallel and are read as a set by Jewish communities even now during certain feast days. Psalm 118 is the point in this structure where the psalmist shares a vision of the future messianic kingdom. This time when a future Exodus-like experience will occur and God redeems the people and delivers them out of bondage. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever. Let Israel say, his love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his love endures forever. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and he brought me into a spacious place. The construction and arrangement of the Psalter is 100% done on purpose. It tracks an overarching narrative leading from the promise of God through the exile into the Messianic kingdom, and then concludes with 5 psalms that each end with a call to praise. And for me, seeing this structure makes these psalms all the more meaningful and adds more weight based on where they fall in the narrative of the psalms. They aren't just randomly numbered, they're put here on purpose. Psalm 100, this call to praise, is situated within a recognition of and response to the exile. The people are not where they want to be. They have been taken from their homes. They're working hard to draw themselves back toward who God wants them to be. God is the true king, not our captors. That is what Psalm 100 is proclaiming within the context of that narrative structure. These people who have taken us captive, this political power that has robbed us of everything, cannot remove God from the throne. So shout for joy, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Know that the Lord is God. And what happens when we cry out to God in worship? Psalm 118, verse 5. That's what happens. The vision for what is to come. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. When I was in exile, I cried to the Lord, and the Lord brought me into a spacious place. If we hold the book of Psalms as a new Torah, a new teaching, we see a people who are remembering their promise, their covenant, and working to remember the law that had been given to them. And maybe it's just me, but when I read this, I think about this people in exile, a people who say, okay, we ended up in a place where we don't want to be. Let's get back to basics. In her book, The Spacious Path, Practicing the Restful Way of Jesus in a Fragmented World, author Tamara Hill Murphy reflects on how adopting a rule of life, like St. Benedict, opened a spacious path for her. A rule of life is a schedule and set of practices and relational rhythms that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus and to become like Jesus. And she reflects throughout this book on how adopting a rule of life and establishing these spiritual rhythms has helped her on a spiritual journey. But it's not always easy. We're pressured in our Western North American capitalist culture to focus on productivity. We are trained and taught to measure outcomes and are encouraged to have something to show for our efforts. And sometimes that stands in the way of our own spiritual well-being. We often start focusing on tactics or strategies for getting us to where we want to be in the fastest way possible. But the spiritual journey we are on, however, does not and should not fit into that framework. Murphy writes in her book, quote, I want the rule I have created to deliver outcomes of mystic euphoria and profound spiritual insight, and in the process, I am prone to miss the presence of God I say that I am seeking. With the eyes of a tourist, I am blinded to the gift of Jesus' companionship. I can see only my own ideals and expectations. But if I pay attention, even and maybe especially in those moments of despairing disappointment, I will hear a gentle summons to notice God and to notice myself in God." End quote. Henry Nouwen, theologian and scholar, in talking about prayer, frames the experience of prayer as wasting time with God. Nouwen encourages us to enter a spacious place where there's no specific outcome that we're aiming for, where we're not measuring the effectiveness of the exercise. We simply enter a spacious place and waste time with God. In our fragmenting society and in our splintering church, when people start to feel like they're losing their footing and they feel unstable, we start to go back to what we know. We look back at what we know for sure. We start putting ourselves into a tight space. We start feeling the squeeze of the metrics and politics and rules and expectations that can bring us comfort. Maybe I should be more honest and just say, I look back at what I know for sure. I look back at the rules. I look back for the guardrails and try to bring them closer, because bouncing around like a pinball is disorienting. Psalm 100 is written out of that bouncing around. God, even in the wilderness, even in my exile, I proclaim that you are God. Your love endures forever. I cry out to you from the wilderness. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and he brought me into a spacious place. In the unfolding narrative of the Psalms, as we grow more fully, into who we are intended to be, and as we grow into closer relationship with God, we're called into a new place. And the place into which we are called is not a place where the reins tighten or where the walls close in. It's not a place where we have to crawl on our belly and can't even lift up our head to see where we're going. It's not a tight place that confines us. It's a spacious place. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and the Lord brought me to a spacious place. So I'd like to challenge each of us to work to adopt personal and communal rules, St. Benedict rules, that work to pave a spacious path on which to walk with our God. And one step in doing this that Murphy recommends is by creating spacious silence that makes room for prayerful listening and loving presence all at the same time. It's said that Mother Teresa was once asked, "What do you say when you pray?" And she answered, "I listen." And the follow-up question to her was, "Well, then what does God say?" And she replied, "He listens." How often do we sit together in silence? How often do we sit in prayerful listening? It's rare enough to sit alone in silence, and even more rare to do that together. So I'm going to ask for you to join me in beginning to build that spacious path. So I'd like to invite you into the next minute to just sit together silently with God together. And I invite you to adopt a posture that makes that comfortable for you. I will watch the time. But let's take our first step together into a spacious place. as we become more of what God desires for us to be, we don't enter a space that is more restrictive. We're called into a spacious place. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Give thanks to the Lord, for he's good. His love endures forever. Let Israel say, his love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his love endures forever. And when hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and he brought me into a spacious place.